Welcome to day 3 of our Service Dog Handler Symposium. Today we're hoping for a great conversation on some of the more challenging decisions that service dog handlers have to address. And you may not have to address all of these, but it's the idea of none of these are a definite right or wrong kind of answer. It's going to be very individualized for your team. So you may see a little bit more one team siding this way, one team siding that way, although we are all very positive based trainers. These are more opinion type questions, is what I'm getting at, the things that we'll be covering. So before we get into that, let's just do a quick introduction of people. I'm Penny Beeman. I'm owner of Uber Paws of Love in Northern Michigan. And I am one of the Crazy to Calm canine coaches facilitating this conference. And so, Cindy, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cindy Campbell with Clovis Paws for Play in Clovis, California. Basically, small owner trainer program. I don't know if it's a program, but owner trained service dog is my primary clientele. Try and
Support
get some
group.
help, support group. Get some. We're kind of on a pause right now because I've had some health issues, but we're trying to get resources out there for local people to have in person training where and training opportunities so that with positive reinforcement, because that's severely lacking here, um, because we're too old school, but it basically to provide a lot of support also for the service dog community locally.
All right,
And I'm one
Ashley,
of
go
the
ahead and introduce. Yeah, she's one of the canine coaches too. Go ahead, Ashley.
I'm Ashley Lambert. I am based out of Miami, Florida. I primarily now work with service dogs. I have a home-based 18-month program where I do raising as well as online coaching for handler trainers. I technically started my journey working with dogs that were behavior cases, reactive and fearful cases, and then um, when working at a facility, got the opportunity to work in service dogs. I do have a disability myself, which led me to train my own service dog, and I was able to help others, which led me towards designing my own program.
Awesome. Go ahead, Pine.
Okay, hi. My name's Pine Irwin. I'm with Irwin Dog Training Constant Canine Companion. I am a behavior specialist, which means predominantly my client workload are behavior cases specializing in aggression and aggression presenting cases. But I do work with service dogs. I find that I'm often working with outside dogs that have been trained by programs and their handlers are struggling with certain issues. So I come in and help them with that. I have trained multiple service dogs for individuals, including myself. I am a service dog handler.
Awesome. So for today's conversation, we're going to be talking about kind of the ethics that you use. And so just to define ethics is that's your personal feelings of what aligns right for you in your life. So it's not that we all have the same ethical values, although I would say of our presenters, we're all probably 99.9% very similar. There's some overlaps when it comes to ethical issues. So that's what we want you to be thinking about today is applying your personal ethics, what's important to you and the values that you have for your life into the decisions that you're making for your service dog team. So to start with, we're going to kind of take an easy one looking at some of the different aspects of life with service dogs, starting with younger dogs or beginning dogs, looking at socialization for pet-friendly kind of places. And so my question to handlers is, at what stage, and I'm just going to say I think we're all in the same agreement that it's not an age, so it's not at what age, but at what stage do you start to take your young service dog in training that's mainly been doing socialization type training to more more non-pet places? Can you put a pinpoint on that stage? Like you want your dog to do XYZ, or you want your dog to have XYZ behaviors. At what stage do you go? Cindy, would you like to answer first?
Okay. So it depends on the puppy, and it depends on what's going on. I like them to have some basic manners behaviors, know how to walk on a leash nicely. They don't have to be in a perfect competition heel, but they do need to be able to know how to stay close. They need to be potty trained. And the way this, it also depends on the state laws where you live. So, like in California, we have public access for training purposes, which most people that are, you can almost always make an outing, a training episode, a training situation. It should always be on some level, but you need to have, like, if you're going for socialization, I think is not necessarily productive. But so I want them to be working on what when they're starting to be working on their public access skills and starting to generalize some of those manners that they've learned. Um, but I will generally start with like pet friendly places, um, before I will start with an actual full on place that doesn't allow pets.
Yeah, but is there a place where you like transition from pet friendly to start to add in those slow ones? And
I
you
do.
want the manners.
Right. I want the manners, and I generally will start with seeing how they're doing with outdoor businesses that are semi pet friendly, that aren't necessarily known for being pet friendly. Um, like um, like go to our Old Town district when it during a quiet time and just walk them around the sidewalks so they get used to the outside, what it's like being in a, somewhat shopping center type ish area, but that's not really a shopping center. Our Old Town has less traffic than the strip malls, but the strip mall's another place that can be, depending on the time of day you're going and the time of year, it can be a good place to start with those, looking at what those behaviors are and generalizing those behaviors and making sure the dog is comfortable in that situation.
So your
Um,
goal is success and comfort and safety in those
and
outdoor
safety
spaces before you
in,
move indoors.
before
Awesome.
we move indoors. And that also allows so that if you have like Nick was doing this stuff because training was so limited when he was a puppy, he was doing this stuff at six, before he was 6 months old. He would, every time we went to class, we almost ended up going someplace else because we were limited on where we could go because it was during COVID. And so he did go more places than I might have wanted him to go, but he didn't go to those places until he was fully comfortable potty trained. And I knew he wasn't going to, try and lift his legs someplace he wasn't supposed to. So it really is dependent on the dog and the situation, and it can change. It's going to change from dog to dog. It can change in time, like if there's different social restrictions. And it's definitely something, if you don't drive, and you don't have a driver in your house, it also can be more challenging to figure those training situations out.
Same in more rural areas. All right, Ashley,
Yeah.
would you like to kind of take a stab at that question? I know it's a huge question.
Um, I feel like when I start to take a dog out for public access work, and we're not talking about, just socializing them to different environments anymore, it is when I can see that they're consistent in their behavior responses, their behavior skills that we've worked on, but also that they're consistent in being able to check back in and respond to me. I find, at least the way that I train the dogs that I work with, that is a specific indicator that I use for environmental comfort, because I allow a lot of, like, let's take a look at, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what's going on. So when we're okay with what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and what's going on, we look you know, we check in. So if you are checking in a lot, if you are not feeling like you need to go and check stuff out because it looks too novel to you, you have to see it. That's usually when I'll start working them inside of stores that are not normally pet friendly. When I know that reliably they will give me that response.
I love that. It's like you're kind of looking for them to be just totally content in the pet friendly environments and just happy to be there and focused like you need them before you move on. Pine, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, so for me, very similarly, yeah, I look for a dog who's really comfortable in a novel environment and that is pet friendly. And I don't ever throw my dogs into Petco at Saturday morning, at 10 a.m. when it's going to be absolutely a zoo. I think that that's setting them up for failure and the other dogs who are present for failure, just because there's too much chaos happening all at once. So I look for a dog who's fully potty trained. That is like my big one. Like we are reliably not going to pee on things. I look for a dog who is comfortable in a pet store, a Home Depot. We have a D&B, which is sort of like a local version of Tractor Supply here. Um, Different places like that. And then I start pushing them into places that are outdoors, but not necessarily strictly pet friendly. Mostly because I want to start experimenting with that kind of stuff and like the novelty of being outside, but also it's a little bit less of a problem if there is an issue to just like peace out and get out of there. So I do things like go to like a farmer's market or something like that. And I try to pick one that's going to be a little bit low key. We have one here locally in my town, which is a suburb of Boise, that on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. when it opens is dead. Um, so I will go then and I will start experimenting then. And once I see a dog is really kind of comfortable in that environment, that's when I start to go, okay, you might be ready to go to the grocery store or to the Fred Meyer. If you're Kroger's, if you're back east, it's the same company, but those kind of things. But I always want to be looking for that dog to display a level of neutrality to their environment where they can still maintain their focus, they can maintain keeping their head on their shoulders, so to speak, and that if anything weird happens, they don't immediately, default to complete panic. They might spook a little, but they're like, "Oh, okay, we're good to go." And it's going to differ for different dogs. You're going to have some dogs that get there quite young, and I still consider that in training. In Idaho, we are allowed to bring service dogs in training everywhere that you can take a service dog. They have legal access rights. Um, it's going to vary from dog to dog. I've had, dogs who at 9, 10 months seem to be ready to kind of step into that doing public access training. And I'm going to specify that when I'm doing public access training, I'm not expecting this dog to do tasks in this environment yet. When I'm transitioning to that, this is literally just getting them conditioned to the environment. I don't want to ask a dog to transition into a novel environment, then on top of that, be expected to work. That comes later with more maturity. Usually by the time they're about 2 is when I start putting those, when I want full cognitive and physical development. But I've known dogs who really weren't ready to enter into a service dog role or do that kind of stuff till they were nearly 2 years old, to even begin really public access training until they were 2 years old. They were all of them Labradors, but they're a little slow sometimes to mature. But it really just varies dog to dog what timeline you're looking at. So I look for behavior. The behaviors that I want to see. I see a dog that's fully potty trained. I see a dog that's really reliable in, adhering to their skills cues of like, you're going to heal, you're going to stay focused, you're going to do that in those pet friendly environments. Then we go to like a not so pet friendly outdoor environment. And then it's like, okay, let's try Fred Meyer. But I'll start Fred Meyer at a weird time too. I'll be like, it's 8 a.m. on a Thursday morning. That's when I'm going to go because I know that there's going to be fewer people there, etc. And then I build up from there. It's always about setting that dog up putting them in the shallowest, most calm kiddie pool possible to start and working our way up to the deep end.
So one of kind of my things, like I totally agree with everything everybody said, but another one of the things that I look for is my dog's ability to pretty much ignore other people in the environment as well. For one, like my dogs are super social. We greet people all the time, and I work toward making that fun for my dogs. But that also means if we're going to say hi to people in lots of situations, they have to not be able to say hi to people in work situations, right? So that's one of my like deciding criteria of if they're ready to move on. So generally, I want my dogs to kind of ignore all people unless I give them permission to interact. And we usually have some defined parameters for us. But so I want my dogs to kind of have that firm understanding of when we walk through, say, a wing of the hospital for a practice exercise in hospitals, not going to a doctor's appointment. When we do a walkthrough to an environment like that, I want my dog to already understand they're ignoring everybody in that environment unless I'm directing them to interact with somebody. Which I will then, take that time to, sometimes there's a greeter by the door or something, and they're iffy seeing a new dog coming in. And I'll stop and socialize with that greeter a little bit and let them say hi and let my dog meet somebody. And then we go back into work mode so that they're not focusing on people. So that whole key on being able to engage safely with people, but also knowing that they're not engaging unless directed is a key for me. And so I just want to double check if anybody out there in the audience has a question or, you can put it in the messages. You can also raise your hand either with the reactions key to raise your hand or if you're showing your camera, you can hold your hand up. Sometimes that will do the reactions for you automatically. So then let's kind of just look a little bit. I know a few people had said manners as far as like being able to walk nicely and check in. Let's talk a little bit about that in leash manners in general, which obviously is going to differ from environment to environment, right? What I want in a working service dog public access mode is not what I want when we're, say, walking to the car from my house or, going out on a walk on a hiking trail, totally different manners. So just focusing on the working dog manners, does anybody want to answer the question of like, what is your preferred leash skill manners, or can you sum it up in, you know, what you prefer when it comes to leash manners in a public place? Any one of our panelists.
I personally like loose leash. Dog is next to me. If I'm starting young, it's in the vicinity of a couple inches ahead of my toe to a couple of inches behind my toe. But I also have not just position, but awareness, spatial awareness. So I don't want the dog to just have awareness of the position I want them in. I want them to have awareness of the space we're moving through. So if I'm moving forward and the space is getting narrow, you should fall backwards. We don't have enough space, the two of us, to get through here. And sometimes that can take some time of us like setting up objects in spaces and walking through narrow spaces, even in my home before I will attempt it out in public. But if I am talking about how I would like their leash skills to look when I'm starting public access beyond socialization, that is where I would like it to be. That is where how I work towards it, because I know that a lot of dogs, they go through narrow spaces and they end up bumping into things, knocking things over on shelves, Those are little accidents we can make in other areas, but probably not in the grocery store. We don't want to do that in the grocery store. We don't want to do
Mhm.
that in, spaces where people who we don't know if they're comfortable with dogs might interact with something our dogs come near. So that's in general what I would say my
I do
leash
the same thing.
is. Yeah.
My dogs generally have about 18 inches on a hands-free leash, usually shoulder strap or waist belt, but 18 inches away from me, that actually allows them to totally switch sides. So say we're coming up on a whole gaggle of kids, and so my husky really, really loves kids, and he would switch sides just to make it easier on himself so he wasn't trying to interact with those kids, right? He would move to the opposite side of me if need be, just so that he wasn't tempted to like scooch his butt over and get some accidental pets, right? um, my black lab, on the other hand, is a little bit iffy with kids. Like, she's fine if they touch her, she really is, but it's the whole idea of walking up to them still makes her slightly nervous. She's on the younger side. It's like she can't predict them, thanks to my grandson who never stops moving. So she wants to watch from afar versus be touched. So she will switch sides to avoid something that she maybe thinks is going to reach out and touch her, and she doesn't want to be touched. And I'm totally okay with my dogs. Like, they would do the same thing, drop behind me, switch into heel on the other side. And for the most part, they can self manage which side they're on. And only rarely am I going to direct them to be on one side or another. Maybe I see something they don't see, or maybe something's making me unnervous, uneasy in a certain way, and I want them on the other side. Or it's just more convenient for them to be on the other side. But so I do train them to do both sides and go behind me to switch from side to side. And I do also do the cue of go in front of me to follow through. Like, if I want to follow them through a doorway, I don't use it as much, but it's a skill I want them to have, to be able to go first without pulling that leash too tight. One of the differences for me is that with my balance issues, I always need tension on the leash. So my loose leash looks very different than other people's loose leash. I almost never have a J in my leash because I'm more likely to tip if I have that J. So I work towards doing just that slight pressure of, it's just taunt. It's not, not any more than what you would put on like a pop bottle when you're picking it up. You can't see my pop bottle, but just that little bit of pressure, but that taunt, that firmness to the leash is kind of my goal. Does anybody else want to answer that question? Like, what do your leash manners look like?
Uh, for me, I want to be as literally hands off as possible. I have a hands-free leash and my hands are busy doing other things. I don't want to have to hold your leash and monitor it. So for me, I don't ask for, a very precision heel. I ask for my service dog to be comfortably at my side. There's usually a few inches gap there, mostly because I move abruptly and I don't want to step on my dog. I teach them to lead, which is to go in front of me through a narrow passage, or to follow, which is to get behind me. I do teach both side healing. Um, I have always taught that to every dog I've had. Even my non-service dogs, I liked them to be able to work on both sides just in case that's required. I want a dog who, yeah, they're when they get distracted, they might look at something, but they're not going to apply pressure to the leash, and that they respond quickly when reminded, like, "Hey, bud, remember you're supposed to be here." Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, yep, got it. Focus. Um, I want a dog that's just very comfortably moving. Branch is often behind me a little bit. Like he keeps his nose, like the tip of his nose, kind of even with my knee, which for me feels like he's a little bit behind. But for him, it's more comfortable because he doesn't want to be stepped on and he doesn't want to be he doesn't like the shopping cart like at the grocery store. He thinks that is just, he doesn't want to be run over. So he's just got a little bit more spatial awareness, but he's right there, which is nice because when I stop, he'll typically swing his butt inward so that his butt is aligned back behind me, so he's not taking up a lot of extra space. I'm not looking for a precision drilled heel. I want a heel that's comfortable for my dog and for me because they're going to be doing it a lot for long periods of time. I want them to be loose and comfortable in that situation. So if I'm working with the dog teaching that skill in a public access setting and I see that they're not able to relax into that heel, that tells me that A, we're in an environment they're probably not that ready for, and B, we need to do some more work on that leash because they're not to a point where they just sort of automatically slide in where they're supposed to be and chill out.
Cindy, do you
And
have an answer? You just go ahead.
yeah, I do. I like a loose leash. I like it basically to not have to be touching the leash. And I want my dog that if I use a fair number of hand, because for one thing, I have this, for whatever reason, I am very biased. I need my dog on my left side, and that's a me thing. It's not, I don't care where other people keep their dogs. That's
It
where
just helps you.
but it helps me. I need my dog on my left side. That's what I need. My right side is weaker, and it also creates an issue because I sometimes use a cane, and when I use a cane, I use it in my left hand. So I was going to teach Nick to do the right-sided healing, and it did not work for us. So we just said, forget it. We're not doing it. But I want him close enough where he's not interfering with the cane and I'm not having to hold the leash in my hand with the cane, and that he's close enough that he's keeping a loose leash and I'm not having to touch the leash. I also want him to be able to follow directions that I give. I do a lot of hand signals, like if I pull him in front of me, like between the shopping cart and me, if we're looking at something, or between a counter and me, or if I tell him to get in between my legs. I want him to have enough leash that he can do those things without me having to touch the leash, and that he can follow, that the dog can follow those cues at the, with, like, okay, you want me to get in this position, I can do that, and I don't, and nobody has to start fussing with the leash.
Right.
But I want that
Because what
leash.
Cindy means when she says she wants to be able to pull her dog into a position, she means she's going to put a hand target out and her dog's going to move into that hand target. So she's
Actually, I
magneting
don't
him
even,
into that
I
position.
don't even necessarily do that. Nick follows finger points. So like I will just like
Right. But I mean,
do
you're
this
not
and
going
he'll
to
go in
like
front of him.
use leash or gear to physically pull him
No,
into
he's
position. You're
no, and
encouraging him into the position you want with your hands.
I'm giving him a cue, and it's often with a hand. It's usually with a hand and a verbal, and I don't necessarily make a distinction when I'm doing that. I mean, we do have a competition heel, but that's for other purposes, and I don't want to use that like walking through Walmart, because that, my dog does not need to be healing through Walmart, because that's not what his job is there. He needs to be alert to what's going on with me and be able to be responsive and not focused on what it, do I have to stare up at you looking adoringly at you as I prance through Walmart? That's not what his job is at Walmart. Um, and I need him to be able to have the freedom to move around. If we do walk into something, I'm not necessarily going to give him a specific cue to drop back behind in a narrow spot. I want him to make the decision what's best for him in the moment, to go forward in front of me or to go backwards. I want him to have a little bit of autonomy with that, because sometimes it's not, depending on the situation. It's California. We are fairly, there's good deal, a lot more people than there are around where you are, Penny. And
Bigger
sometimes
crowds.
bigger crowds, and it may not be feasible for him to go behind me, to drop back. And so I want him to be able to have some autonomy with making those decisions. There are times when I will give him very direct guidance on where he is supposed to be. But if I don't give him that, I want that guidance. I want him to be able to make those choices, because that gives him just a little bit more control in his world. Um, but I do want him to be responsive and being able to be, I want my dogs to be able to be focused enough on what's going on, and you know so so that they're comfortable in that environment and can follow those cues. And that starts at a young age, because we will work on that just walking around the neighborhood or in the house or in the backyard in different situations, so that when it's time to go start doing these things, it's such habit that we don't have to think about it. It's just,
Right.
oh, okay, we're just moving to a new environment. That's okay. I can follow these cues.
So I don't know if the people listening noticed, but I want to point this out. All four of us that are sharing our opinions on this all rely pretty much on hands-free leash, or as Pine said, I think she said it best, my hands are busy doing other things. I don't want my hand on that leash. So that kind of leads into that ethical. We know we see an awful lot of teams out there wanting to work off leash. And we know that ADA allows it when disabilities present it, but we also all know that there is a lot of issues where people are saying their disability needs it, and it may not necessarily be what's ethically best for that team. So we're not going to get into the whole debate of what is right or wrong because that is a personal decision. Um, but if somebody kind of wants to share their feelings about maybe when they think it's acceptable to not have a leash for them versus when they're going to make sure they always have a leash, and for the clients they work with as well. Anybody want to kind of address that one?
Yeah, I have a very simple rule. When the dog's not working, he can be off leash. Otherwise, he has to be on a leash. Just point blank, I have yet to find a single valid reason that there needs to not be a leash. Now, the leash might look different, right? Like for some people, it's a waist leash. For some people, it's a leash attached to their wheelchair. For some people, it's a 7 foot lead instead of a 6 or a 4. For some, it's I've had clients who use a bungee leash so that there's a little bit of give and slack for the dog and for them for their own benefit. But I have yet to find a single thing that we can task train a dog for that they can't do on a leash. And there's the argument people make about like, oh, well, what if the dog has to go retrieve someone? And I'm like, that's not really something that I can train super reliably if a handler's out of commission. If you're unconscious on the floor, I can't super reliably tell that a dog's going to go get whoever is supposed to they're supposed to get. If you need help because you're incapacitated, the best thing that we can do is that when you lay on the floor like that and you're not responding, teach your dog to bark like hell, and that will get people's attention. And if you're in a store with another person and you have been separated, that person will heal your dog and they will come because they know, to do that. So if your dog is working, they should be on a leash for their own protection and for your own protection. You can't if your dog needs to get you something from down at the end of the aisle, guess what? Go there with them. Um, you know,
Right.
and I'm of the opinion that dogs shouldn't be picking up items off of the shelves anyways for you. It's not sanitary. So if they pick something up and they hand it to you, that is yours now forever. So if it's something you don't want, or if they
Too
misjudge or
bad
something
it's
like that,
yours.
too bad. It's yours. It's just not sanitary. It's not appropriate to expect other people to deal with potential dog slime germs on shampoo bottles and things like that. It's not a huge deal, but I just think it's a matter of respect. It's the same as if somebody has a really small dog and they want to stick it in a shopping cart, which I'm not opposed to because there are definite dangers of people running over dogs in service dog. My 90-pound black lab was not exactly a small dog and he got hit by carts on a semi-consistent basis. It was wild to me how many people would just like bump into him. I'm like, you can't see him. Like he's here. He's very easy to spot. So when you have like a small service dog, like a little 20-pound service dog, I have no problem with you sticking him in the cart, but put something down to keep their dirty feet off of this stuff. It's just a matter of respect. Just like your service dog should be clean, they should be groomed and presentable and not smell gross like a swamp or have a lot of mud and dirt on them. So for me personally, that whole argument of the leash, I just don't. If your dog is working, they should be on a leash and they should be clearly indicated that they are a working dog in this capacity at this moment. When they're off duty, knock yourselves out.
I totally agree with that. Work mode means on leash. There may be some small exceptions to that, such as like I have a dog training center and my dog is on duty a lot there. It's our property, open to the public to the point of public comes in to see us, right?
Yeah.
But so like in that situation, it's not like I'm out at the grocery store. So Belle may be working off leash in that environment. It's kind of like a home environment for her. And she's kind of cross off duty a little bit, on duty a little bit, and back and forth. So there are some situations like that. So if you're taking your dog to work with you and you have an office with a closed door and people are not just coming in the door all day and you're working your dog off leash in that type of situation, very controlled environment, I don't have an issue with that. But then when you take your dog out of that office into the hallway, they should be on leash. That's kind of my opinions for that. It's based on environment and how controlled that environment is. And we all know that any place like a store, a hospital, even a car lot, anything like that is not a controlled environment. We have no control over what happens in that environment. And in that situation, we need to have the leash. Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
Oh, I would say, Penny, that like your office is, or like an office building or like your workspace is not necessarily a open environment. It's like a semi-open environment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and that's a little bit different from being in Home Depot. So,
I completely agree that the dog needs to be on a leash. If so, like we have a specific leash that I use for my dog when we are doing anything that's public access, and we use different leashes. I collect leashes like most women collect shoes, and we have different leashes for different activities. Every activity has their own leash, and every leash has its own set of rules. Um, but one of the biggest things I think that a leash communicates, especially, is if there's little to no tension, and Penny, I'm not talking about the tension that you're using for balance, but if you can tell the difference between a dog who has been trained to stay with their handler and work with their handler and is with their handler versus the average pet that will have some tension on the leash. And the handler will have some tension in their hand holding the leash. That leash is communicating to the public, my dog is trained, my dog is controlled, my dog is under control, and my dog is doing his job. Whereas if you have the dog with the leash, that the tension and the dog's at the end of the leash and the handler's, making lots of corrections and with the leash, it's a completely different level of what you're communicating to the public. And so I have taken Nick out without a vest or harness. It's very rare. My harness doesn't scream service dog all over it, but it does say it is definitely a mobility harness, definitely a service dog harness. And I'm okay with that. I want them labeled. I want something that indicates that, yeah, this is not just a pet doing a pet job. It's a dog, it's a service dog helping a disabled person. And I want that communicated to the public in a manner that's reasonably easy to understand. And I think having a leash and a leash wrap, a harness, something that communicates that this dog is working, it's not just for our protection. It also lets the public know what's going on, that you can't just bring Fido into the grocery store because because it's hot outside. That Fido needs to either stay home or or it needs to not come, because he's not a service dog, or you need to be communicating that in some manner my dog is actually a trained service dog and I am a disabled person that needs this dog. So and we just need to make sure that we're communicating to the public that what we're doing is controlling our dog is controlling themselves, and that if something happens and they do something dog like, because they are dogs after all, and we all have issues as humans, we have issues at times, we have a method to stop that behavior, not with overt correction, but if your dog decides, oh, I need to sniff something, you can cue them back, but you also have a physical means of stopping that behavior, in the situation.
Unlike when the off-leash poodle ran up and gave Azul a French kiss in a store.
Right, or the German Shepherd got between Nick and myself and stuck his face in Nick's face, and then the little kid that was accompanying the German Shepherd threw a rock at Earl. It's, you know, that's,
Bad
you
things
need to be
happen
able,
when leashes aren't used, whether it's by our
that,
dogs or other people in the environment,
right. Well,
or other animals
those,
in the environment.
the German Shepherd was on a leash, but the person on the other end of the leash didn't know what he was doing, or didn't care what
That's
he was
another
doing.
story for another day. That's a
Yes.
long-winded
Reasonably
one,
been
but
able
yes,
to,
we all know that there are accidents. Ashley, do you want to add something there?
yes, most definitely, because I think a lot of the concerns, at least with the handlers that I worked with, um, were the safety of their dog. I know that in other areas, and I've heard of people who like do try to send their dogs to shelves or send their dogs away to things, send their dogs to go find someone in crowds, which I do think is an unreasonable expectation. But I do know individuals who have dogs who they're working dogs and they have POTS. They can't always predict if and when they're going to fall. Sometimes when you fall, it can be out of nowhere. So I just recognized no one mentioned a traffic lead. And I that is something that I usually will recommend to my handlers because I have been in situations where shelves have fallen and me being able to drop my pull strap and have my dog move out of the way was very essential in that moment that sometimes can be inhibited by a leash. And that is important in certain situations, potentially when you're dealing with a small dog. I think as long as you're capable of having access to that traffic leash in a moment where you're going to need control of that animal, that's one thing. I know sometimes the leash can be an inhibitor. A long leash can be more of an inhibitor for some handlers, sensory wise for some handlers. So I think the inclusion of a traffic leash as a leash option, a leash that it might not be that long or as involved, but can still be available um, as far as the handler um, being able to grab it, but the dog also being able to be safe should the handler fall over. That
Can
that
I
is a
ask
situation.
you this, Ashley?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you know of, and anyone else can answer this too, do you know of any dog that's actually been injured from a person falling?
Um,
Not
I I was the witness of it actually. It
Yeah.
was a situation where it was a smaller service animal, not tiny, but the person who was using them was a tall person. And it happened in two situations when I was with them. One where the leash that she had, even though it was a hands free, it was not long enough. And the dog did end up getting hurt, stepped on. Um, there was a situation when we were at the park and the dog, we were in a enclosed area and the dog was off leash and the handler went down and the dog was able to clear the handler. So yes, I've
That
seen the situation. Um
that's why I asked, because I mean those are very valid points. My questioning though is in that situation, if the handler had a longer leash for the dog, a more appropriate leash, like you said, the leash was too short, would the dog have been injured or would the dog have been able to evade? So,
that's fair, but then I have to worry if my dog is having to dart away and it's in public, can someone trip over my leash at that point? A traffic leash
right.
would do that.
Exactly why I think it's important that we're having this discussion, right? Because we all know that there's no one right set of gear that works for everybody. right? There's no one right leash that everybody should use this leash because it's perfect for everybody. It's a very independent situation. In my experience, I work primarily with larger dogs, not too many smaller ones. And the smaller ones that I do work with are generally either, like Pine said, in a cart with a barrier or in a bag attached to the human, and not so much walking on the floor in busier environments. They might be doing it in not so busy environments because we do train them also to walk nicely, but we want to watch the crowd and the environment to where we position those small dogs. But so in my experience, all dogs will evade if they have the power. So I would much rather see somebody have a leash that can at least get longer. Heaven forbid anybody get shamed for using a retractable, and 90% of the time I would agree, or maybe even 99% of the time I would agree that retractables are appropriate in public places. But if that's the only leash that she could use that would allow the dog to stay close enough when they needed to stay close without tripping anyone and still have enough leash to escape when she fell, you know, I would assume that that would maybe be an acceptable one. And not that I'm judging that person, so don't get me wrong, because I don't know the client, I don't know what would work. But my goal as a trainer is to work with every client to find a way that there is a leash out there somewhere, even if I have to make it myself with paracord or something else, but to find a way that everybody can use a leash safely. That's kind of my mission. So, but that does kind of lead us into, we could
Well,
continue to
can I
discuss that. Go ahead, Pine.
actually, I think that one of the things that happens in service dog circles and that I think is really unhelpful is the extreme circumstance. So people are willing to justify taking shortcuts. Well, I have to use aversive tools. I have to use this because I have X, Y, and Z, because some people X, Y, and Z. And the reality is those circumstances are actually quite small and they're quite rare and they're quite abnormal. If you are someone who is continuously having trouble staying upright on your feet, a service dog quite literally may not be the appropriate solution for you. Just because now we've put another living being in harm's way when we know that your behavior and your disability manifests in such a way that does endanger that dog and you're constantly tripping over that dog, et cetera, et cetera. If you are somebody who stumbles occasionally and you are worried about falling and tripping on your dog, make sure that the dog that you're working with is sturdy so that if you do happen to bump into them or fall, that they have the option of withstanding it and they're not a 5 pound chihuahua who's going to suffer greatly. The other option is make sure that your leash is long enough that they can get that space out of the way. A 7 or 8 foot leash is not extraordinarily long to carry. A bungee leash that extends that far is not extraordinarily long to carry, and they can simply get out of the way. I don't know that we want to sit there and say, like, well, in this like one extreme circumstance that happens once out of every 50,000 times, we need to be making accommodations across the board for that one wild extreme. I just feel like the exceptions are what
I
proves the
totally
rule.
agree.
If I can interject, I personally feel like to say one in every 50,000 times is an exaggeration of the circumstance and a random figure you just sort of threw in there. But
Well,
I
it
was
is,
mentioning
yeah.
a traffic leash as an option.
Oh, I
So
think a
it's
Mm-hmm.
traffic
leash
I mean,
when
I love a traffic lead or like a leash that has the traffic lead option, etc., for various and sundry circumstances. I think a traffic lead is a good choice. I do think, however, a traffic lead, again, the issue is that you're going to drop the leash and then you have no control of your dog. And if you are incapacitated for some reason, that's a scenario that also I don't like. I don't like allowing the conversation to evolve around circumstances that are not terribly common, but also still pose a significant risk to the dog. At the end of the day, if you drop that leash for whatever reason, you have to accept the responsibility of the fact that now your dog is no longer under your control. Shit could happen. A traffic lead is a good option, I think,
I
if you're
came through
someone
that
who,
situation.
huh?
I'm the type of person who, if I know I'm going to go unconscious, that is something, a situation I would train my dog for.
Yeah.
I have had, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're someone who would need to use that tool, because I don't want to be exclusive to any individual nor their circumstances or what that might pose for them. As somebody who's a member of the BIPOC community, what you have access to, what you might be able to get,
Sure.
how you might be able to manage that situation with your disability, etc. Those are all different things. So what I don't want to exclude is the mention of the option and that specific person's situation. If someone was only able to use their chihuahua or whatever have you dog that is a little bit smaller, even in the medium size range, because I had a medium sized dog for a while. You know, that's not necessarily so small that I might severely injure her, but that's not large enough that, like, if I fall over as someone who's a little bit larger unexpectedly, she wouldn't have that issue. And if I, so it was something I trained for a specific circumstance that did help with other trainers, and it is an accessible leash for certain people. So I'm not trying to paint it as an extreme
Right.
circumstance. Yeah.
I use a
It's
traffic
totally
lead all the
fair.
time. I generally have my dog also clipped to a hands-free leash, but because I need that tension on my leash, that tension is usually on the traffic lead, not on my hands-free leash. So, I mean, I'm all for using a traffic lead. There's a few situations where, like, so, physical therapy, for the most part, we're in a closed environment, door closed. My dog's laying there and she has a traffic lead on, but she's laying there resting on her spot. And I'm usually on a table and I can't move. But in rare situation, we've had to get up and go into another room real quickly or something. And instead of grabbing her larger leash, I might grab her traffic leash for that, knowing that we're just going to quickly go out, like step on a scale or something and come right back into our room. So definitely times where I think a traffic leash to me is still a leash. I don't care what kind of leash you are using, right? Whatever leash mitigates your disability, but I do believe in a leash. So if we could, and I don't think he
Ashley,
minds, go ahead.
no, yeah, no, Ashley, I think that's a really valid concern, and you're right about access to materials and things. I would say though, for someone with a Chihuahua, like if you are prone to stumbling, and like, that is like the number one reason I don't own a Chihuahua. My husband has cerebral palsy, and like he would 10 out of 10 step on a Chihuahua, right? I would just put that dog in a bag and carry it. They're much safer up there when they're tiny, tiny, and I mean, people who have limited resources are going to have to work with, sometimes what they're presented with. And so if that is a circumstance, a little bag, like a little airline shoulder bag or a little, even like a little purse, a Chihuahua is still going to be able to effectively do the job that they are doing as a service dog. And because obviously a Chihuahua is not being used for mobility assistance, hopefully. Um,
And I have recommended very small dogs go in strollers.
yeah,
I've
just
seen people
Yeah.
put them on their rollators. Like that's cool. I'm cool with that. But I do know sometimes you're not talking about necessarily a tiny dog, but maybe like an Australian Shepherd. But we're not talking about a Great Dane.
yeah.
Effectively, we're bigger. We are heavier. Coming down hard, we're going to do damage, even if
Yeah.
it
Well,
is a fainting spell.
Well, and
the
I
other
think
thing,
that those dogs should have leashes that allow them to get out of the way. Like a bungee leash is such a good option because it shortens, but it can extend, and that dog can be, they don't, unless you're, I mean, I do have a friend who is 7'4", but unless you're like an 8 foot tall person, they only need to get so far away so that they can just be out of range, right? Like they don't have to be 20 feet across the aisle. And I do think if you are somebody who falls on a consistent basis, you do need to train your dog to respond to that appropriately,
well,
to like
the
sit or whatever.
the other aspect of that is if you're falling frequently, you really need to be looking at what other mobility devices, what other options are available to mitigate that falling, because falling is a huge problem and it's very dangerous for the handler to be falling on a regular basis. If you are passing out from pots or something else, that dog maybe needs to be trained to alert you to oncoming symptoms of passing out. I know Julie's dog, Royal Mama Julie, her dog Earl alerts her to when she's having an issue, and he gets very insistent and gets in and intervenes before she passes out, so that he's in a position before she passes out where he's both safe and he's effectively doing a task. And I think that's something that needs to, if you're fainting because and you have some and you're able to, you should look at a way to train your dog to alert to that, if so that they alert before you pass out. If you're stumbling, then you need to be looking at some sort of mobility aid that's going to help you not stumble so you don't fall on your dog. And that's for your personal, that's for the handler's safety. It's not just the dog's safety, but also for the handler's safety, because falling, you cannot fall without getting a bruise or a jar or something, feeling pretty icky for a day or two at least afterwards. And there's always the risk, especially as we're getting older, of broken bones and things of that nature, or hitting your head. So if it's I'm worried I'm going to fall because I fall once a week or once a day or twice a month, maybe I need to be looking at something else that's going to stop me from falling. Maybe it's the dog doing counterbalance or momentum, but you also need to be aware, what's causing the fall and what can we do to mitigate and prevent those falls from happening. Because falling is a huge issue in healthcare, and that's something that the healthcare team should be evaluating if it's happening on a regular basis. Securing the environment. That's why stores aren't supposed to have trip hazards, wet floors, and stuff like that. So it does get into the leash issue, but ultimately we want to prevent those falls from happening in the first place.
I don't disagree. And I think that also still goes back to what is the environment that we live in. Disabilities, though they can be predictable, can also progress and be unpredictable. And we
Right.
might have to use something to mitigate ourselves in the meantime while we are searching for these things. If the traffic lead is that thing, and we're talking about like all dogs, should be on a leash, and that is your best option for your situation, I just don't want to eliminate it when talking about it. I know that
Well,
for certain people, maybe you just find out that that's your situation, that for certain people, your access to healthcare and how quickly they actually go through that, because in the healthcare system, that
Takes
can be an
time.
issue too.
it can take
Yeah.
time.
It can take you
Yeah.
much
And we
longer.
definitely don't want to exclude anybody. Like, I have probably come across two people ever that I think legitimately had a reason for having their dog off leash due to physical disabilities. Very, very rare. I know many wheelchair people. I've worked with many people in various different mobility devices that have all been able to successfully, it's taken some time, but we've all been able to successfully find a way for them to use a leash safely. We do know there are some tasks that, for example, pushing a button for a handicapped door, they may need a little bit of a longer leash than that. So I have one of our admin, actually, she's not here today, but so in certain environments, she may have her dog on basically two leashes. One is the retractable that goes it clips into her seatbelt on her wheelchair, so her hand is not on the retractable. And then she'll have a smaller leash for heel. And if she needs her dog to leave that heel position, moving into so that would be like the traffic leash that's attached to her chair when the dog's in heel, and she can flip that leash off to send the dog to push the button. If that's all that you're using that longer leash for, I wouldn't be so opposed to somebody taking their dog off the leash short term to reach something that's just out of reach of your traffic leash or your shorter, 18-inch leash or whatever your short leash is. Not opposed to that. It's the whole idea of don't use the fact that you might have a seizure or pass out as an excuse to be off leash all the time, because I think the safety measures that we address in those situations are at greater risk and put you and your dog at greater risk than trying to find a leash solution that works. And a traffic leash is a leash solution in my mind. I mean, like I said, I use them regularly, usually in combination with another leash, but still, sometimes not. And the idea is we want people to think about what's going to be right for their team. If you're struggling with finding out what's right for your team, there are a lot of crazy to come canine coaches with various different setups. Then we're happy to kind of share what we found works for us and kind of brainstorm. We do occasionally, when somebody needs it, we would do it more often, but offer a 30-minute leash review session that's free with multiple coaches that will help you brainstorm into what will work for your team to anybody who wants that. That kind of leads us into another situation in the tasking, and is it acceptable to do tasks off leash? And I know Pine had already brought up one, such as I'm sending the dog to go find another person that can help, which again, I totally disagree with in a work environment. Like I actually do train my dogs for that in a home environment. If I tell them to go find dad or something, private property, home environment, they're not doing it in public. But in public, my alternative is, because it's not usually because I'm laying on the floor incapacitated, or go find dad, is lead me to him. Let's save my spoons, but you're going to take me to wherever he is, which they do by scent, versus sending my dog to go find them on their own. Because in that meantime, anything could happen. Somebody could grab that traffic lead and walk off with them. Somebody could say the dog bit me, even though the dog didn't, just because there was no human attached to the dog. You know, all kinds of bad things could happen in that situation. So I don't believe in that task. But so, Scott, if you would like to unmute and kind of describe your situation that you put in the chat, I think that's a very valid one. I am going to preface that we're not going to debate it. We can all share our opinions, because again, this is one of those that is an opinion-based topic based on what people are willing to accept as the risk for their team. So go ahead, Scott. Tell us a little bit about the situation you were describing in chat.
So I was, and this is not saying dogs should be off leash during the whole training session or your whole work day or while they're working. I've had several veterans that served, and one of the things to help mitigate there and help them feel safer before they got into a full-blown panic attack was sending their dog off. And let's just say we're in a doctor's office. Okay, I've got the environment in my head, so I apologize. So you're going into a doctor's office, you're going into a new situation, and that individual is nervous and scared and ready to have a panic attack. You can send your dog off to check the room, not clear a room. And I got to tell protection dog trainers this all the time. They're not allowed to take care of threats. They're allowed to come over and tell you it's clear, or make it to where you don't go in the room until it's clear. So the individual, if they have flashbacks,
let
or if
me
they're
ask you
used to,
this real quickly, if I
I've seen,
can. I don't want to interrupt, but let me ask you this, because it's important right at this point, right? When you're sending them to clear the room, what is the dog looking for?
well, hold on.
What are they determining safe or not safe?
They're not clearing a room. They're checking the room for safety.
Right,
To
checking the
make
room.
sure they're
What
safe.
are the
So
safety concerns they're checking for?
it could be people. It could be some of them. There's other ones. Um, the plastic that some people can't have. I can't think of it now. My brain farted.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends. If the owner
So
feels,
an
I mean, the dog
allergy
can
type
just go in there
thing,
and just look.
or
There's allergy ones. There's also that people help people prevent from having a panic attack. Sometimes just sending the dog forward and having him come back, and the dogs will tell you, yeah, it's safe to go. Maybe it's too crowded. Maybe the person's really is an introvert and can't be around people, and they freak out. The dog's sensitive. They're your teammate. They know what's going on with you. and they'll say, okay, yeah, it's good. So put the leash back on. The dog's paying attention to you. Dog looks a little happier. Cool. That's an invitation for that person that it is safer. So that gives them another positive option so they can move forward to do with the rest of their tasks. So they don't just all of a sudden get, sometimes they get stuck in their own heads. Like, I don't want to be here and don't want to do this. So they can continue on with their health care instead of calling back in
So,
a week saying, sorry, I missed my appointment.
right. So you're assuming they're going into either an empty room or such as a waiting room with few people that might be,
Oh yeah, going into a
calmer.
waiting room.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So in this situation, and like I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but so like in this situation, I'm not opposed to sending a dog in the door first, but you're talking smaller environments per chance. So
It
the dog
could
should be able
be
to
it
step in
could
the
be
door on leash and check the room without actually walking around the room, if
Yep.
that makes sense.
they
I would
can, but
expect my dog to be
sometimes
able
the
to tell
dogs
me there's
actually have to
something
walk.
unsafe.
Yeah, the dogs absolutely do it, and they do it a lot. A lot of the military dogs do, and a lot of the veterans that come out, this is what their dogs did is they searched the room and would come back because people were looking for the dogs. The dogs are a lot more subtle instead of looking for firepower. So this is something
Right.
that's, muscle memory, so to speak. So when the dog
And
would
I
go over and just
understand.
check the room and they come back, say, good, we're safe. It would take maybe 2 minutes, but sometimes the room might be around the corner or there's like the hallway. And it's not like every single time, oh, we're going here, go check the room. Oh, we're going here, go check the room. I
Right.
haven't had to deal with one of those clients yet. I'm not saying they don't exist. Um,
Right. And I kind of understand the philosophy behind the task, right? I understand the idea. Um, unless the dog has very specific things that they're checking for, such as like the presence of a gun, which they would smell. They don't actually have to physically see the
it,
gun. They could walk past something and smell a gun on a person if that's a trigger, that kind of thing. But that's why I ask, what is the dog actually checking for? Or is it just giving the handler confidence because the dog was fine and nobody hurt the dog, so the dog came back, everything's safe?
okay,
That's what
so
I'm
here's
trying
the
to
thing
get at.
about
What is the situation?
it's not so the point of the task is to make sure the person feels safe. And it's usually people
Right.
threats. If somebody might be too aggressive in the room or somebody might be um too agitated, and it happens with a waiting room, so dogs learn what different types of agitation there are if
Mm-hmm.
it's safe to go in. So it's just like you see a lot of the protection dogs. Like we cannot have protection dogs as service dog. That's not even the ADA says they don't want this. The creators say they didn't even want protection dogs as service dogs.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much, too dangerous. So the dog's not doing a protection of the person, but it's doing a hey, we're good. There's no
Right.
threats. I
Right. Or
can't
they're
do
backing
guns
their person out
because
of the room, such as with the allergy. If they go in and detect a perfume or something the person has an allergy to,
push them
they're
out of the
telling the
way, like
person,
don't
hey,
touch
don't go
that.
in this room. Right. And
Yeah,
So
don't
all
I
of
touch
that
get
that.
can be
Don't go
that,
near
achieved on a
but
that.
leash. Like all of
yeah,
that can be
see,
done on a leash. All of it.
the,
Every single thing can be done on a leash. First of all, clearing the room.
Not all of it. Not all of it can
Like,
be on. So hold on,
get
time
a
out, Pine.
7 foot
Not all
line,
of it can
send
be
them
on a
into the
leash. Because
front
if
to check
hold
and
all
on,
right,
return.
hold up.
time out.
Everybody
Like,
stop. Everybody stop. I'm the admin, okay? So, first of all, Scott, you explained your task. Give Pine a minute to address, and then you can counteract what she said, okay? Pine, go.
So part
like,
of the
okay,
so when you go
No,
into
Scott,
oh sorry, go ahead. I missed
Pine,
that.
go.
Sorry, I
having
missed it. I missed it. Go ahead. Sorry.
You're good.
having trained military and protection dogs, every single one of those things can actually be achieved on a leash. Every single thing you listed. So, in order to check a room, the dog merely has to step into the room and observe. Sending the dog off leash to cover every corner of the room. How big is this room? That's a really big room. That's a lot of off leash time. There's a lot that can happen between here and there. So, like, it's not like we're sending a dog to check in a Home Depot sized room, right? We need the dog to go in, forward, survey, turn around, come back, and say, go forth, right? You can do that on a leash. Just get a longer leash, man. It's not that hard. As far as scent detection, look, I've trained dogs to track people and find people who are lost in the woods. They don't have to go in the room and check every nook and cranny to pick up a particle that is going to be a problem. They can come in, and if it's in an X amount of radius that is going to be a potential problem for contamination, they can check it, they can give the alert, and the guy can leave the room. The person can leave the room. None of those tasks require a leash to be non-existent. They just require the handler to be prepared to manage a longer line or to be prepared to trust their dog. And if they're not prepared to trust their dog to step into the room and like observe the room and then turn around and come back out, on a 7 foot, 8 foot leash, then they're not prepared to trust the dog to go off leash and check every nook and cranny. I mean, we need to be realistic about what the actual scenario is. And I know that the handler thinks that that makes them feel better, but the handler's looking at it from a perspective of it only works under these scenarios. I'm going to tell you, of having worked with military and police dogs, the amount of time that they get sent into a place off leash, very small. Very, very small. And the circumstances are incredibly correct because those dogs' alerts need to be categorized as they are happening, not after the fact. So, and then of course, we're talking about doing the cognitive deployment of the dog goes in and comes back out and says, yes, everything's clear. No, the dog goes in and says everything's clear. The dog does not. It's not easy. However, when we are talking about, like allergen detection, et cetera, the dog detecting it from 30 feet away, which they absolutely can do, isn't that useful of information because that is a very long distance for that allergen from the handler. So if the dog comes in and says, hey, in the very far corner of that room is a problem, well, now the handler can't come into the room at all, right? Even though they'd probably be just fine if they sat on the other side. So that like starts limiting their access through their own lack of understanding about how scent detection works, how scent cones work, how air travel particles work, and then their own access in terms of how like a room goes. Now, I have a task for all of my service dogs because I don't do well in crowds. Then that task is exit. And that is like if I'm starting to have a problem, exit, like exit means we're leaving, get me out of here. And they
Exit the
all know how to
room,
go out
exit
the
the
same way we
building,
came in.
get me
Yeah,
to my car.
just exit. And then once I'm outside, I can follow that up with another cue of like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to sit for a second and just like regroup, or like, yeah, go find the truck. Like we're done here. And my dogs have those cues. All of those things can be performed on a leash. I don't have to ever drop the leash to get those done. In fact, I'm better off if I don't, because if I ask my dog to get me to the exit, it'd be nice if I was attached so that I could follow them to the exit, particularly if my brain is short circuiting. Now, that is on a handler to learn how to recognize those scenarios and learn how to give those cues. Now, and if they can't give a verbal cue, there needs to be a hand signal cue or something else, or that the dog can respond to a trusted
A
human to be like,
stimulation in the environment.
yeah,
Maybe the dog sees that and just does it, and the handler trusts the dog and follows the dog, even though the handler didn't specifically cue it.
yeah,
Something in
yeah.
the
So
environment cued it, and the dog does the job.
those are training issues and partnership issues is what is really being discussed here, is this idea that in order for the handler to trust the dog has to go and run a whole perimeter of a waiting room. The dog does not. The dog can come in and observe what's happening, gather a crap ton of information through scent, and make a determination at that point. And then the handler can decide, I trust my dog or I don't trust my dog. If you don't trust your dog, then you need to work on that partnership with your service dog so that you can. We quite literally, as handlers, put our lives on the line with these dogs. And I go, I am trusting you to make this call. I have trained you. We have worked together. I have to either I trust you or I don't. And if I don't, that's something in the relationship that's not going to be solved by releasing the dog to check a room for whatever reason. And again,
Okay.
in a military application, they don't release the dog that often off of a line. They're on like an 8 foot line check-in stuff. They very rarely send the dog in. If they send a dog in to clear a room, it's because the person that they're gonna find to clear is getting bit.
Okay, I think there is a crucial point that is being missed a little bit here. Scott, I don't think is trying to mention that this is an excusing action or a reason for a dog to be off leash in practice as we're sharing our opinions. he is also mentioning that this is already something, perimeter check is already something that veteran service dogs have been taught to do as a task that's off leash. This is present already in society and probably should not be getting demonized as something a service dog shouldn't be doing, because this is actively something that I have seen within programs, other programs and organizations, including one that I directly work with, where they are teaching these golden retrievers or Malinois to go in an area. They have the handler talk to the establishment and let them know that this is something that the dog does. It's not something that they're doing invasively and just saying, yes, because I'm a veteran, my dog is allowed to walk around in this area. It is usually a thing where they are alerted to the fact that this is something that the dog does, and the dogs go into the room and, yes, just walk around the room, come back out. And yes, it can sound complex in terms of the handler's comfort and PTSD and all of that. I don't think we should really be judging the way certain people's comfort and safety manifests. People in armed forces have entirely different experiences and entirely different ways that they feel safe, realistically. But because it already is something that exists, I think we're bringing it up as something that, yes, we can have an opinion on it, but perhaps something we should not be judging so harshly, because
Correct.
it is
Everyone
something
has
that
to
is.
decide what's going to work for their team. So what I believe is right for my team and the teams that I trained may not be what everybody believes. Everybody has to make that determination. My only emphasis, again, yes, you're right. We don't want to exclude people if that's what they're being trained to do. Um, what I want to say is you have to outweigh whatever your decisions, you have to weigh the pros and cons, and one of the cons being risk for safety. What if there's somebody in that room that is terrified of dogs and you send your dog around the room? If you're getting permission to send your dog in the room, that's one thing, right? But I know people that will do this, say, in a restaurant where they have no control. The restaurant people, staff don't know what's going on. The people that are eating sure don't know what's going on. And then the dog is sent to like clear the whole restaurant before the handler can go in and order their food. And there's so many hazards in that situation to the dog in general. Um, whether it's somebody screaming out of fear, terrorizing a child, um, somebody reaching out to grab the dog because they think the dog is not tasking and they think the dog is running free and that handler needs help. It could be somebody that just thinks the dog needs assistance and will grab that traffic lead to hold the dog back, and things like that are just options that situation could go horribly wrong.
So then,
So yes,
realistically, is it more of an issue of consent?
Yeah.
I think so. Consent would be a
Yes.
huge thing. If everyone in the room consents to it,
Yeah. Go for it.
fine. But
because then
like
you're
Pine
consenting to
had
accommodate
said,
that veteran.
Yeah.
going to
Absolutely.
Home
If
Depot and asking them to clear the room would be absurd,
yeah.
right?
I think asking like a consent solves all of the problems, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everyone. Like if I go to my therapist's office and I ask for consent for my dog to be allowed to do something outside their normal parameters, then and they say yes, then great, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally fine, and I think that comes back down to that issue of like just because we're service dog handlers does not mean that we get to operate outside the bounds of social norms, even though our dog is at a restaurant. We do have a ethical and responsibility to, make sure that, you know, we are being considerate of other people's responses to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, we don't have to be like, oh my God, I'm terrified of dogs. Why is your dog in here? I'm like, bitch, go to another aisle. Like, just walk away. You have the free will to do that. Um, but like, it's like I see it a lot in the service dog circles. People are like, well, my friend asked me to come over to dinner, but said not to bring my service dog, and that's not legal. And it like, look, actually, it is legal for your friend's private residence, even if they are opening it up to the quote unquote public, to say, actually, we don't want your dog here. And, maybe your friend's a terrible friend, or maybe they have valid reasons for not wanting a dog in their private home. Those are valid. It's not illegal. It's just one of those things that, as a social etiquette thing, you as an individual service dog handler can decide, is this a make or break issue for me? So yeah, I think consent is a huge issue. Like if we
We
get
gotta let
consent.
Scott be able to
Oh
talk
yeah,
again.
go for it.
Go ahead, Scott.
So thank you. Actually, it was very valid points. And I appreciate the discussion, Pine, and the conversation about this. But there's a couple of things I do issue with. Is one, I don't need consent to a service dog, and that's where one of our industry, our world in America is messing up. Two, my panic attacks, my ability to have my dog go 10 feet into a room. And I'm sure you've been to many doctor's offices, and yes, while they are pretty user friendly, if my leash gets caught up on something while I'm ready to have a panic attack and my dog's moving to make sure I feel safe so they can quickly get back to me, and I get stuck on a leash, I'm going to lose control over not just my dog, the situation, and myself. That's all part of the teamwork. If I'm going to have a panic attack because I'm going to my appointments, I'm doing what I need to do, I'm not really people. A lot of people I get are not living in cities, and they have to go into cities. They have very specific triggers that they're actively working on, and the dog is helping them get through their routine, or even just once a week or once a month to get their prescription refilled, so they can get to their benefits and then all that stuff that goes with the VA, right? It's not that the dog, and you brought up the point of smelling something and limiting that person. No, the dog knows and have it's a teamwork. It's not just the task. That teamwork, that dog can say, okay, this is a good enough spot for you to go sit down at. When the dog comes back, you leash it up. But dog has to go around a corner and there's people going around and the dog moves around and the leash gets caught up, however long it is. I have to be able, while I'm trying to be aware of that, a panic attack is not a conscious thing. That is something, if you're going to
Right.
have one and you're relying on a
You
safety
can't manage a
and that
leash while
safety
you're
gets
having a
cut from
panic
you,
attack, is what you're saying.
especially if anything goes wrong. It
Mm-hmm.
accidentally knocks over a table or a planter that's next to her. The dog maybe moved out of the way and the leash got caught on something. The dog's not trying to manage the leash. It has to go in 3, 4, 5 feet and then come around somebody, and that person gets caught on the leash while they're trying to avoid the dog. It can't be my person's responsibility. It's me and the dogs. They're going to go in.
Yeah.
Okay, this person might make feel nervous, so we're going to come in. My dog will come in and say, hey, let's just go sit over in this chair. Or this person's leaving, let's not go in yet. Dogs are very good about this stuff. They can mitigate a lot more than just a specific task of what they need us to do. Not just say, oh, you're gonna, like, we know seizure alert dogs can measure up to 2 hours. I've got too
Mm.
much going on. I'm probably gonna miss my 2 hour time frame of having a seizure. I've watched people at anime conventions in front of thousands of people pass out. They start going into their seizures. What happens with seizures? Thankfully, I was there to help make sure the dog go and found the ambulance. I didn't know where we're at while I'm helping the person, my friend. But the dog went and found the ambulance. Or we teach them to find an authority figure, somebody in a vest, so they can go do this stuff and get right to us. The dog knows what they need to go get, how to help us feel safe. There's so much more, like,
Yeah.
as I look at the
This is
individual and what they specifically need, and a lot of it's brand new to me, and I've been doing this for 20 plus years. Each person, I have to look at their type of stuff and how they're going to freak out. Panic attacks and anxiety attacks are my biggest ones. Depression. Um, and the dogs have to be able to see that. And I know they can see it way before even I start to recognize it with clients. I'm only with them for like 2 hours a week. So there's more stuff that we can actually, so there's more stuff that the dog actually does based on that individual's needs. There's stuff that they tell me that they won't tell me that the dog recognizes at home, right? Like we'll always look at the dog and say, "Oh, look, the dog's trying to cuddle with you. How are you feeling? The dog's got its knee rest on you. Did you train that? No. Well, let's keep pushing on that because I think what's your blood pressure? What's this? What's that? Oh, yeah, it's too high. You take medication. Oh, well, yeah, that they do. And a lot of the time the people are trying to push their dogs off. I'm not in the mood because they're defensive. They don't want the touch. They're irritated. And they
Mhm.
have to learn to accept that this is what the dog's trying to tell them to do, and then we can move forward on that one. So as far as if a veteran feels needs just, and it's not like you said, it's not a whole room. We're not clearing restaurants. We're not going to search every single
And
little
I
thing
think
in our
that's where the
restaurant.
problem is, though, Scott, is because many of us have seen them trying to clear whole rooms like restaurants, because that's what they believe they have the right to do.
But see,
Right.
and that's the thing
That's
when you
where the
go by the
ethical
ADA,
dilemma comes
you
in. So
can't
we,
no protection dogs and no clearing. It's no, they're
right.
not allowed to clear. ADA says your dog can search the room, check the room, and come back and let you know you're safe. And they can
Mhm.
tell you, I'm not able, you can't go in. You and the dog. But
I
you trust in the dog to go in and say, not right now, Dad, Mom,
yeah, I
or
feel
now it's
yes.
okay, but go sit over here on this side.
So I think yes, there is definitely a fine line between saying that when I mentioned consent, I meant consent in the part of simply being considerate. Do I think you have to ask to be a disabled veteran and take up space in that regard? No, I
No.
don't exist. We exist as disabled people. We do have these accommodations. And I do believe that we tend to over accommodate the able bodied public more often than we tend to want to seek a way to accommodate the disabled person. Um, Service dogs are an applicable form of disability mitigation, and they're a very specialized form because, yeah, like, yes, there's plenty of people who can have mobility issues, but we know that a lot of psychiatric disabilities and mobility disabilities manifest differently symptom wise for the individual. And so, that is always going to be unique. And I think how your service dog works with you is also going to reflect that. And I do think that um, that type of diversity needs to be talked about because there shouldn't be this thing where if this is truly a need military veterans have. First of all, I'm not about to say anything about it because I'm not a military veteran. I'm not going to say what I need as a military veteran and how my life looks and what makes me feel safe because I'm not a military veteran. Only somebody else who has that experience is able to tell me about that experience. And if I am not also willing to make space for that experience, I'm being a little ableist. I
Mhm.
have to take, I have to take into consideration, okay, what is the level of training that we're putting on the dogs to be able to perform this task as well? Is this a consideration we can take in? Yes, I understand not everything is 100% reliable. I don't think everything, if it's not going to be 100% reliable, needs to be trained with force. But I do know that with lots of different types of breeds and their handlers, I have been able to mitigate through training what some people feel a tool mitigates better for that specific handler. And if that's the case, then there needs to be space to talk about that because what we don't want is to, even if we have opinions, not be able to create that space if
Correct, which
we
is
actually
part of
need it.
why we wanted this discussion today. So I'm really glad this topic came up because it is one that is very passionate by many of us. And we do also need to make sure that, like, we're not criticizing people such as Scott. I know he doesn't use a service dog anymore, but we're not criticizing people who are choosing to do the task. Our goal is, will you please at least look at that task from an ethical standpoint that fits you? And at least consider those social norms and what you're asking the dog to do and the other environments, like what environments may be safe. I have actually worked with clients to teach the dog to enter their house and search their house and come back to the front door. It's different. It's a private residence. If there's a stranger in that house, then yes, we want that handler to know, right? Even if it's a house guest, maybe another roommate, spouse, somebody invited a friend over and there's a friend in that house and the dog is coming back and saying, no, there's a stranger in the house, right? You know, total possible scenarios where I can see that task being effective. I do think people stretch the boundary into what I would say is ethical. Maybe they think it's ethical. And like, that's the thing about ethics, right? It is based on your opinions and your core values. I think that in the majority of situations, there's always the exception to the rule, right? But in the majority of the situations, it's a training issue. Um, Not to pick on Scott, but just, he mentioned the dog goes in and circles a person on the leash. So that person is now tangled, or the dog knocks over a table. Well, I train my dogs not to wrap around stuff. That they will avoid. And if, say they do walk on the opposite side of a tree than me, then they're to back up and come back around to untangle that leash themselves. So there are training things that I believe could almost address everything. At the same point in time, we don't want to say that this is our ethics, this is what we believe, and anyone else who does it any differently is wrong, right? That is not our mission. Our mission today is to get conversation started, to getting people talking about what can we do to make it better for everybody. Me as a service dog handler, if I'm in a restaurant and this off-leash dog comes running into the restaurant to check that room, even if they are for a handler, that's going to cause me a moment of panic. Yes, I'm not going to go into a panic attack, right? Because I am who I am. I don't have that issue, right? Just like Ashley said, she's not a veteran. I don't have panic attacks. My dog's not going to panic that another dog came into the room because my dogs are around dogs all the time, right? But it's going to make me question that. If I saw then the dog return to the handler and the handler come back in, I'm going to be able to self-regulate myself and calm back down, right? But say there's somebody else in the room that does have panic attacks and has a service dog, and now that dog cleared the room and we've caused that second disabled individual to now have a panic attack because of what just happened. That's where I think we have to look at societal norms when we're considering the tasks that we choose for our service dog to do. I don't want to just change the conversation. I want to make sure Scott felt heard. So we're going to give him one more chance to speak, and then we're going to move on to our next thing. Okay? Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Penny. You guys are a lot better at explaining things than I am and going through the whole situations. I appreciate that. I'm glad we had these conversations. And that's why I love this. I'm really appreciative of everything you're putting on, Penny, is because it is about the conversation. If we don't have any form of discomfort, if we don't have any form of, if we're always just trying to agree on everything, it's not ideal, right? We have to be listening. And I think I'm just speaking that out
Exactly.
loud to make sure I think about it. Make it sit in my head a little bit. So I mean, it's great, and it's when I deal with service dogs, it's always that individual, like it always should be, and what kind of tasks we can do together. And a lot of times, I have to tell people that's not possible. I know you want your dog to go. I actually had a person want to clear the room, and I'm like, this is not going to happen. It's not legal. It's not in the ADA. So we had to go back to basics and go, this is what is expected and can happen with your dog. And it's not going to happen until the dog's pretty reliable, and this is the only off-leash situations allowed to happen with while it's working. I mean, off-leash at home, off work, I mean, that's different. But, we train everything on leash. And when you feel safe enough, and then how we interact with the dogs off leash or off time matters on work, the way I see it too.
That relationship, off-duty relationship,
Always
also
about,
impacts the on-duty relationship.
oh yes, 1000%. And if I don't, a lot of people, that's the fun part too, is you tell people, they're paying attention to their dog. Excuse me, I'm sorry. They're paying attention to their dog more while they're working, but when they're not working, they use that quote, "I just want my dog to be a dog," and I'm like, this is when the real relationship's happening. This is when your dog finds you trustworthy, untrustworthy, things we can do with the relationship and what they're asking for. It's like, I don't get a girlfriend just to, I don't know. I can't think of anything
Right,
because that's
right. I
relationship
know where
based.
you're going. But
It's
yeah,
just
I mean, the dog
relationship,
is
right?
there
I have,
as a companion as well, not just as a working dog.
yeah, we don't turn them, we don't, Yeah, So, but thank you. At bottom line, at
Mhm,
least I don't know if anything else is confusing or if I missed the point, but at least a thank you, Penny and Ashley and Pine and Cindy and
mhm.
everybody else is joining. That's doing this right now. Um, thank you for all
Yes,
of it.
I think the discussions are important and we need to have more of those discussions. And that's one thing that I would like to have out of this conference is a plan for future discussions. I do want to kind of just move into a different category that is also very highly debatable, maybe among this group, maybe not. But so the idea of, so to simplify it, we say gear and grooming, but the idea is what you put on your dog or how you present your dog in public versus what your expectations are. So the easy one to throw out there, and no, this is not shaming in any way, but the easy one to throw out there is the dyeing your dog. Dyeing as far as painting your dog nice, pretty colors, right? And so I don't think the act of dyeing your dog is ethical or non-ethical, right? It's a choice like any other gear we put on, the collar we put on our dog, the harness we put on our dog. It's as long as you're using something that is appropriately safe for dogs. I don't think that's an ethical question. But what we have to look at is then if we're going to make our dog rainbow colors and then also put on patches that say, don't look at my dog, are we asking too much? You know, we got to kind of weigh those odds. So if you're a totally social person and you're fine with people staring at your dog and asking you about those things your dog is wearing, I think it's okay to do all kinds of weird, crazy gear. You know, I don't necessarily, in my opinion, I don't like the gear that has swear words, but I'm not going to be offended by it and tell a handler that they can't use those words if they feel better with those words on their dog, right? I'm just not going to put it on my dog. So kind of just some guidelines and not what, so this conversation isn't going to go with what you think other handlers should do. This conversation is going to be what are you as a service dog handler, and we'll let anybody chime in on this, panel experts and other people, but what as you as a service dog handler are comfortable with as far as those gear options for your dog. And I will start out with saying I have black dogs. There's no way I could dye them. I mean, I could bleach them, but that would not be good for them. So I'm not going to dye them. Um, I generally have like two scopes of gear that I will put on my dog. My husky actually wears very little gear because that's just him. Um, he will wear gear if I put it on. He just would prefer not to. But so I have a flashy set of gear when I'm feeling a little bit more spirited, and I have a more down to the point, leave me alone, we're working kind of set of gear that I wear, you know, I guess it's more professional looking is what some people would call it, but I might wear that to more like doctor's appointments or on a day where I know I'm really bad and I just don't want to interact with public. And what that has on, what I found that works for me is very, very big labeling that says service dog. And I usually don't have anything else on the dog. Maybe potentially a do not pet, but very rarely anything else. It's a label service dog and plain and simple and basically my leave me alone gear. So for me, I differentiate based on what I need. Cindy, go ahead and tell us where you are with that.
Okay, so I don't dye my dog because I don't have the spoons to deal with dyeing my dog. That being said, I do dress my dog up occasionally, and I when I dress my dog up, so like times he tends to get dressed up is we have a thing called Big Hat Days when we have the rodeo in town and everybody gets kind of cowboyish. Um, there's tends to be a lot of boots and hats walking and big belt buckles walking around town when that's going on. So Nick does have a cowboy hat and cowboy boots that he does wear for that type of thing. And I thoroughly expect to get comments when he's dressed as such. He also has a fedora type hat that for vacation type scenarios, like when we're, I don't know, like if we're going to an event that he just wants to be Joe Cool at, then he will wear his fedora. He wears Christmas sweaters. When he does this, I have to be aware that I need to have the spoons to deal with the public interaction of the comments that are associated with wearing an ugly Christmas sweater or antlers or a hat and what is going on with the dog. Now, the nice thing about those things is if in the middle of the situation where he's wearing a costume or clothing or something, if I don't want to deal with it, if I want to lessen the attention I'm getting, I can just simply remove them. I did have him in cords for quite a while, and I love the cords, but they do draw a lot of comments because people either don't understand the difference between cords and matting, or they make weird, very biased judgments about it because they don't understand that that's actually how poodles were groomed before they had the advent of high velocity dryers. So I don't necessarily have a problem with it. What I get frustrated with is when somebody posts a picture of their dog, and it's wearing rainbow color, it's dyed rainbow color, or it's got some sort of, I don't want to pick on rainbows because it's not the rainbows. You have your dog dyed like a giraffe, or cut like a buffalo, or something that is not a traditional dog look. And then you take your dog out in public and you get upset because people are noticing and staring at your dog. Well, because they always notice your service dog, because you can't help but have your service dog notice. But if you are, but don't get, if you're doing something that because you think it's cute, you're drawing attention to yourself. And if you don't want comments, don't do it. If you don't mind the comments, and if you're going to do something like that, just expect the comments. Just like I know every time one of the dogs in our group goes out and it's if any dog's wearing shoes, or all dogs are wearing shoes, there's comments made about the shoes. Almost always the comments are made about the shoes before anything else is made. And Julie, I'm going to recognize you. Go ahead and say what you're going to say. Let me see.
Yeah, I imagine Earl is probably the shoe comment. That was one of the things that I was going to mention. So on really bad days, and I have to go out, I have really bad PTSD, anxiety in public sometimes. And if I have to go out, I find it very calming and grounding to have Earl in his fancy collar or pretty sweater or, nicer shoes. I mean, he's got a surplus of shoes. um, and he's an extra fluffy, handsome poodle. So I'm fully aware it's going to draw a lot of attention. And we do get a lot of comments. But for me, I need him looking like that. And if I don't want to deal with the comments, I'll, instead of taking the gear off because it's a sensory grounding thing for me, I'll wear some sort of gear. And, like, I'm only talking to my poodle today. Ignore me. Antisocial mom, uh, I'll wear something to label me to keep people from like interacting with me. Because I'm fully aware they're going to comment on, oh, look at the fancy poodle wearing the, rhinestone collar and shoes,
Can I just make the comment, Julie, that you have themed outfits for Earl. Julie's local to me, and we train a lot together. And like when we go to the zoo, they have a zoo outfit for the two of you. You have matching.
Well, he has to wear.
They match frequently.
Yeah, we always match when we go out, but he has to wear shoes because of tasking purposes. I need him wearing the shoes so I don't get hurt. And so his shoes match the outfit. They're gonna match. That's just a me thing. I don't necessarily look all cute, but my dog always does. It's just a thing that's grounding to me.
And we
It's more
definitely,
of a me thing, but I'm aware it's going to draw attention, so I try to take the attention off of me by wearing something.
right.
Don't
And
look
we
at me,
definitely know
you know.
that shoes are a function, right? They serve a purpose. They're keeping our dogs safe. So we're not trying to say don't ever put shoes on your dog if you don't want people staring at your dog. You have to think practical and function as well when you're considering these options of what is right for your team.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and like the cooling vests. Oh my God. People that
Those
don't
get lots
know
of
their
comments.
cooling vest, those get, why would you put a jacket on your, it's 115 outside. It's like, because
Yes,
it's 115 outside.
it's
They need that
115
evaporative
outside,
cooling.
and I have a black dog. Putting a wet white coat on my dog is going to cool my dog off.
Yeah,
And
so yeah, definitely some of the gear that needs to be functional brings a ton of comments. So if you can't take that gear off, then, you know, label it some other way that is going to draw the attention elsewhere.
well, I'm going to say that Nick wore a G-string around the Reno Air races, or the Reno Air Show last year, because um, one of the there's a group there, section 6, they're always in orange and they always do wild things, and they gave us G-strings because somebody was getting married, and I think Julie has one of the G-strings. We got them signed by the Canadian Snowbirds, and I had one of those G-strings around Nick's neck all day the day we got it, and yeah, we got some comments about it, but it was left on there because we were there, we were having fun. He was working, he was serious, he didn't know what it was, but it was a G-string on his neck. And
Sometimes fun
that's
has to come into it. And by all
sometimes fun
means, if
has
something is making you happy, put it on your dog. As long as it's not hurting your dog,
exactly. But
or
I
bugging your
guess my
dog, making them mad that they're wearing it kind of thing. Yeah.
I I guess my issue is I don't care if people dress up their dogs, dye their dogs, color their dogs, do creative grooming with their dogs, make their dogs look like a buffalo or a giraffe or a unicorn or what have you. Just be aware that if you're going to do that, you are going to draw even more attention than you already do with your service dog. And be prepared for that, and don't get mad at the public for making comments about your service unicorn or your service buffalo, because that was you have control over whether that dog looks like that or not, and you have the option of making that. You have the
All
choice.
right. So
It's your
you're
choice.
slipping into the judgment zone. So I'm going to just cut you off there. You made your point multiple times. Pine, do you want to tell us a little bit about your choices for gear in public and what you feel most comfortable in as you?
So I stick to a pretty quote unquote professional look. Branch has everything that is color coordinated, most of it's rough wear. Um, and it's, he's got a jacket to protect, and most of that isn't even about keeping him warm. It's about keeping him dry so he doesn't smell like a wet dog when we go into a store. He does have shoes to wear when the pavement is really, really nasty and hot. He has a cooling vest, all of those things. You know, and yeah, you'll get more comments with the more dressed up they are. I have gone to, like a Christmas party or a holiday party, and I've put him in a ugly Christmas sweater for fun. But that's kind of a low key environment. When I'm out in a capacity where, he doesn't have any right to be there other than as a service dog, I'm pretty strict about keeping it professional. And I have very strong opinions about that. I feel like if you are someone who is very, 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 very sensitive to people paying attention to you, a service dog might not be the best choice because it does not matter what they're wearing, does not matter how they are dressed, it does not matter. If your dog is in a place where dogs are not typically found, your dog is getting attention. And that if that is something that you emotionally are not capable of handling, then a service dog may not be the correct solution for your disability and mitigating your disability. So you kind of have to develop it. And yeah, like I feel like if you're going to dress your dog up, you have every right to do that. Um, it is within your right as long as your dog is comfortable with the things that they are wearing and they're not uncomfortable. just know that it's going to come with comments from the general public and prepare yourself adequately for that. And if that is something you cannot manage that day, because there are definitely days where I'm like, it's just like, no. If you talk to me, that's the end of it. And those are days that I either opt to find a trusted human to companion me if I have to, or I just don't go. I'm just like, no, today is not the day to manage Winco.
And how you manage it can be very, very important as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm totally fine with the stern, I'm sorry he's working, leave us alone, walking away kind of stuff, the stern, fine. I'm fine
Yeah.
with the high sweet. Yeah, I know he's cute, blah, 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 blah. I'm fine with the
I,
social side of it. If the
yeah.
idea is figuring out what's going to work for you in that situation, and let's just avoid the arguing of, you shouldn't do that and trying to tell other people, because as we know, we can't control what other people do in life ever. We don't want to enable that they have more rights than we do, but at the same point in time, we have to realistically know that we can't control anybody. And if you've
Yeah.
ever tried to control, say, your mom or your dad, or even sometimes children, we know that it's pretty impossible to get somebody to do something they don't want to do. So we can't expect to control strangers in that way as well.
I
Uh,
tell my clients that they need to get real comfortable saying no thank you. Like you just got to do that.
mhm.
And there are days where I let Branch say hi to people. He particularly really likes children. So sometimes if we're having, I'm okay and he's okay, then yeah, we can say hi to a kid. But a lot of times, no. Just just get comfortable saying no, thank you, or we're sorry, we're busy working and walking away. Because the general public is not appropriate. And I literally had a grown woman with gray hair who looked like she was close to 60 get on the floor on all fours and bark in my dog's face
Yep.
in the middle of Craft Warehouse. And
Hmm.
as I'm watching it all happen, like my brain is just like, what? What? So I was like, okay. And I literally just walked away. Like I couldn't figure out anything else to do or anything to say that was going to, like that whole situation was bizarre. My dog was just like, giving her the side eye of like, what are you doing? And you can't control how other people are going to respond. So you need to be within yourself, have the strength within yourself to say, no, thank you. Yes, he's cute. Thank you so much. We're busy working. Come along. I often just default to talking to Branch and I'm just like, come on, buddy, we got stuff to do. I don't even tell them. I'm just like, we're leaving. Peace. And it's just this idea that, yeah, you can't control the public. So, what you present with your dog, and my gear is very functional, it's labeled clearly. And I do like absolutely like the ADA does not require that, but absolutely I think it's wildly inappropriate to not label your service dog when your service dog is in non-dog friendly places. I think that's just rude. It's bad behavior, it's bad etiquette. I just really don't. And while it's legally permissible for your dog not to be labeled as a service dog, that's one of those areas that I just like have a really if you're walking your dog through Walmart, your dog should just be clearly labeled as a service dog. Okay? It just is. You're not fooling anybody. Nobody's not aware of what's going on. So just label the dog so that there's no confusion and it stops other people from seeing it and being like, "Well, I can take my dog to Walmart too." No, you can't. Um so yeah, but I dress my guys professionally and functional. It's always functional. I might change a collar for a special occasion. Even that is kind of pointless with Branch because he's fluffy. Um,
Exactly.
can't
That's
tell
his
Well,
he's wearing
rule. It's
one.
all functional or it's not on him.
Yeah,
well,
like I used to with my short-haired service dogs that I had in the past. I would like have a seasonally appropriate collar, just for and that was mostly for my funsies, right? But their
Hmm.
gear didn't change unless it was like in winter we have a winter coat that we wear so you don't come in smelling like a wet dog. Um,
and
I'm just really functional and everything's labeled clearly as you're a service dog. This is a dog here in a working capacity. I don't have the 16 patches that they have to read through. And then you're like, then they, come online and be like, people are staring at my dog. And it's like, well, you've got like 18 things to read, like I would be staring too. So for
Can
me,
we
that's
give
just my
Ashley a
function.
chance here? She's got to take
Yeah,
off here.
Ashley, please.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Um, I was gonna say I'm definitely one who is a what they call them gear whores, right? Like I love uh different types of gear. I like to put them in themed gear because I was an avid theme park goer. You know, right now it's a little bit more difficult as far as accessibility at the theme parks. But I was an avid theme park goer, and so I had my Harry Potter themed vest and I had my Disney themed vests, and sometimes I had one for each day. They were always functional, but yes, I expected and wanted people to say something about the vest because we took some time picking this out. Where I will usually get, well, I think any handler is in their right to get a little irritated, is that we can't ask disabled people to read the room and ask the public not to read the room for disabled people. Like there's social norms that go both ways, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I have an issue if you are like you can see that I'm sitting down and I'm tired. I'm removed. I probably put myself away. I'm not in the mood to interact and you make your way over to me to interact with me as if you like hunt me down because you needed to do this, and it's just like no, I can't control the public, but at a certain point, I am going to tell you, like, that was a little much.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I decided to take myself somewhere. You know, the disabled person, though, we can remove ourselves, we're on vacation too. And as much as I want you to ask about, my vest and tell me how cool my vest is when I'm wearing this cool vest at Disney, I especially love it when the cast members are like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. Because Disney is definitely the place
That's why
for,
you wore it.
yeah, that's why I wore it. Awesome, but definitely there's members of the public who are also just it's not even about I didn't read it or didn't see the sign or I wasn't just briefly looking at the dog and complimenting you, right? There's people who are polite about it. Oh, nice vest, or oh, what pretty colors, or oh, hey, the dog's died for pride. And yes, that is something to expect. There all are also people though that are like they are coming after you.
Rude,
You're an
obnoxious.
entertainment piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when I say like, okay, no, that I will draw the hard line because I understand. Yes, pretty, just like a human being who wore a nice dress. At the end of the night, I'm tired. Leave me alone.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I might
Mm-hmm.
have dressed up my dog, but like the reality is the reality. If I removed myself, take the
Yeah.
hint.
Get good at saying no, thank you. Just get good at it as a service dog handler. It is an unfortunate thing because the public will just do. I've had small children escape their humans and run up and like grab my service dog. Like don't do that. First of all, parents, train your children that that is a really bad idea. Second of all, what are you doing? And they're just like grabbing on and holding on to tails and doing that. And I've seen that in scenarios where we're not even talking service dogs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I, as a handler, have to be really good at advocating for my dog safety and for my own in those scenarios where some people just don't get the damn hint. Like if I'm sitting in a corner with my headphones on and my head buried in a book or whatever, I don't want to talk to you. But like as a female bodied person, I think anybody who is female bodied has also had those scenarios where there's like that one dude who's trying to get your attention and you are trying to send every signal possible that says, I actually don't want to engage with you at this moment. And with a dog, people seem to think that the dog is just an open invitation to engage. So I have just gotten very good at being incredibly rude and just leaving or, saying no, thank you. Like today is not the day and is an unfortunate thing that people, disabled people have to deal with, but it is a thing that you have to deal with. I can't reorder the universe just because I would like to. If I could, there would be a whole lot of things that would be way different in the world. But you just got to be really good at it. And that is that is the thing that I tell every person who approaches me about getting a service dog or wanting help with training. I'm like, you got to get good at saying no, no
If
right
you
now.
can't advocate for yourself and your dog, you're going to have nothing but problems.
Developing selective hearing is also a very good skill to have, because
I ignore so
there's
many people.
I ignore people, and I position Nick out of their reach as much as I possibly can, because I don't have the spoons to deal with people most of the time when I'm out. Most of the time, my functional brain capacity is very limited, and it's usually all I can do just to deal with the environment that I'm in and not come home and just sleep for 2 days. So I have developed this, and it probably started as a nurse I, when I was working spinal cord rehab, and my patient, I was like 25, and my patient population was roughly 25 and male, and I got hit on all the time, and I learned how to just essentially rebuff those things very quickly, not being totally impolite, but also learning to say, okay, yeah, I'm just going to ignore that comment. I didn't hear that comment, and we're just going to move on now. And that's a really important skill to develop as a service dog handler, because you cannot overuse that skill, because sometimes you just don't have the spoons to deal with people.
We do need to wrap up here because this is almost a 2 hour, it's a little bit over 2 hour long Zoom. So very, very long. Definitely conversations that I think we need to continue to have. So anyone here, anyone listening to this in replay, if you want to be a part of future conversations, that's really, really easy. You can drop us an email or reach out to us on Facebook Messenger. It's Crazy to Calm Canine Coaches is our group where we discuss topics like this and other training topics. You're more than welcome to join us there. Just look us up. I'll put links in the notes for this. I want to thank everyone who came. I think we had a great discussion, and it is important to remember that we may not always agree on some of the finer things. We may be super aligned in many, and there may be some things we disagree on, and that is okay because everyone has their own past experiences they're pulling from and have their own life to live. So with that, I'm going to tell everybody to have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.